The baby's cries cut through the silence of the shack like a blade. Her mother, barefoot, bruised and trembling, curled her body around the newborn, shielding her from the boot that had already struck twice. Blood mixed with the dirt floor, soaking the thin cloth she had wrapped around her child. "You brought shame into this house," the man growled, his breath thick with whiskey and hate. His name was Raymond, and he was her husband. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her swollen lip barely moved as she whimpered a prayer. Her arms tightened around the infant whose only crime was being born a girl. A crash echoed behind her, a chair splintering against the wall. The baby wailed louder, a raw, piercing sound that filled the tiny space. Outside, the cold Texas wind howled across the plains, a lonely and desolate sound. But inside the shack, the real storm had already arrived. Then, suddenly, silence. The man, Raymond, stopped his rampage. He stood breathing heavily, his shadow looming over them. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for another blow, another kick, another curse. But it didn't come. Instead, she heard the scrape of the door creaking open behind her. A blast of cold wind slammed it wide, rattling the frame. She dared to turn, blood blurring her vision, expecting to see him leaving or maybe coming back with something worse. But it wasn't Raymond. A tall shadow stood in the doorway, a figure wrapped in leather, his silhouette framed by the dying light. Feathered braids fell over weathered shoulders, his face a canvas of painted streaks, ash and ochre. He was Comanche. He said nothing. He just stood there, his presence sucking the air out of the room. And in his eyes, there was no judgment. There was no pity. There was only a decision. Clara had always known silence was safer than speaking. On the raw, unforgiving outskirts of the Texan frontier, words could cost a woman everything, especially a woman like her. She wasn't born into privilege or power. She had married into survival, or what she thought was survival. The shack was a patchwork of timber and desperation, wedged between dry brush and a wind-beaten hill. It was no place to raise a child, let alone dream of anything better. But Clara had once dared to hope. That was a long time ago. Before the beatings, before the whiskey, before her name became something whispered by neighbors and avoided by God. The man she married, Raymond Holt, was a rancher's son who'd inherited nothing but a well of bottomless rage. When the baby came, he didn't see the fragile miracle in Clara's arms. He saw failure. Not a son to carry on his name, but a girl. Weak. Useless. A curse. Clara named her Lily anyway. It was the one thing she wouldn't let him do. She would not let him name the child. She would not let him mark her. That night, after the blows had stopped and the silent Comanche had vanished as quickly as he appeared, Raymond stumbled out of the shack. He didn't say where he was going. He just slammed the door behind him and disappeared into the vast, swallowing dark. Clara crouched beside the hearth, pressing a damp cloth to her split cheek. Lily slept in a woven basket nearby, wrapped in the only piece of soft linen Clara had managed to save from her wedding. She waited. For hours, she waited for the sound of his stumbling return, for the slam of the door, the reek of whiskey, the start of it all over again. But the night remained silent. The wind died down. The hours ticked by. Raymond didn't come back. She told herself it was a blessing. He'd probably passed out in a ditch somewhere. He'd be back by morning, angrier than before. But morning came, and the shack was still empty. The day passed, hot and quiet. The sun set. Another night fell. Still no Raymond. A week went by. The food was running low. Lily's cries were weaker. Clara's fear began to curdle into something else, something cold and sharp. Had he just left? Abandoned them to starve in this desolate place? It was better than him being here, she told herself. It had to be. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Soft at first, then deliberate. No one rode out this far without a reason. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood up, grabbing the dull knife by the fire. She didn't know if she should hide or fight. The door creaked open, slower this time, and it was him again, the man from the storm, the Comanche. He was tall and lean, with eyes like dark coals that seemed to see right through the walls of the shack, right through the walls she'd built around her heart. He stepped inside slowly, not as a threat, but as a question. His gaze flicked to Lily, then to the fading bruises on Clara's face. Still, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He placed something on the rough-hewn table, a strip of dried meat, a small pouch of herbs, and a water skin that was full and cool to the touch. Then he turned and left. Just like that, gone into the cold. Clara didn't sleep that night. She watched the door until morning, half convinced she'd imagined him. A ghost born of desperation. But the food was real. The water was real. She opened the pouch and smelled the herbs, crushed wild mint and rabbit tobacco, remedies known only to those who still listened to the earth. She didn't understand. Why would he help her? Why this silent charity? Days passed. Raymond didn't come back, and the silence where his rage used to be was deafening. But each morning a new offering appeared by her door, a warm hide, a pouch of berries, once a clay jar of goat's milk, still warm, and then a carved toy, a small wooden buffalo with wheels made of bone. Lily, now stronger, her cheeks filling out, giggled when she held it. It was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. Clara didn't smile. She couldn't. Not yet. She didn't know why this man was helping them. She didn't even know his name. But deep in her chest, in the place where hope had long been silenced and buried, something stirred again. A tiny, fragile sprout pushing its way through cracked earth. Not because a man had rescued her, but because someone had seen her, and they had not turned away. She was just beginning to believe that peace, however fragile, might be possible. Lily was sleeping through the night. The shack, once a prison, was starting to feel like a sanctuary. Clara had even started singing to her daughter, soft, forgotten lullabies from her own childhood. The silent Comanche hadn't returned in person since that second visit, but his gifts were a constant presence. A ghost of kindness in a world that had shown her none. She was starting to feel safe, and that was her first mistake. The smoke came on a Tuesday morning. It rose like a crooked black finger over the horizon, stark and ugly against the pale blue sky. At first, Clara thought it was a distant grass fire, a common danger on the plains. But then she heard the hooves. More than one rider this time, 5, maybe 6, and they were riding fast. Loud. This wasn't the sound of a silent protector. This was the sound of a hunt. Her blood went cold. She grabbed Lily from her basket and bolted for the back of the shack, heart racing, the old fear clawing its way up her throat. There was nowhere to hide but the tall grass and the dry creek bed beyond. Her bare feet tore through brittle stalks as she held Lily tight against her chest. The baby, startled from sleep, began to stir with a soft, confused whimper. "Shh, shh, little bird," Clara whispered, her voice tight with panic. She reached the edge of the creek and dropped behind a fallen log, her breath fogging in the cool morning air. She peeked over the top. The riders thundered past the shack, whooping and hollering. They were white men, cowboys, but not local ranchers. Their coats were too clean, their hats too new, their laughter was too cruel. Then came the gunshots. Pop, pop, pop. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to pour from the shack's single window. They were burning it. They were burning everything. The men circled the flaming structure, tossing glass bottles that shattered against the ground, flames licking up with each crash. They were celebrating. Then, one of them shouted a question that froze the marrow in Clara's bones. "Found her yet?" They were looking for her. For her. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. Maybe Raymond had finally come back, not with his own fists, but with hired ones. Maybe he'd sold her off in some drunken gamble, her life and her daughter's life nothing more than a bargaining chip. One of the riders dismounted, walking toward the creek with a slow, arrogant swagger. He carried a long rifle, and his face wore a grin that said he liked chasing things that screamed. Clara curled tighter, pressing her hand over Lily's mouth to stifle any sound. The baby squirmed, confused and scared. The footsteps came closer. The crunch of dry leaves, the snap of a twig. He was right on top of them. This is it, she thought. This is the end. Then another sound cut through the air. A whistle. Sharp, high, like a bird of prey. The man's horse shrieked in terror. The rider spun around, his grin vanishing, just in time to see an arrow sprout from the side of his neck. He dropped without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut. The other riders cursed, fumbling for their weapons, but it was too late. The wind itself seemed to have shifted against them. From the trees, from the rocks, from the very air, more arrows flew. They were silent, swift, and merciless. Within seconds, 2 more riders were down, clutching at shafts buried in their chests. The remaining men didn't wait to see who their attacker was. They screamed, turned their horses, and fled, hooves pounding in a desperate retreat, their curses trailing behind them like dust. Clara stayed frozen behind the log, trembling uncontrollably. And then he appeared. On the ridge above the creek, bow still in hand, his face marked with fresh streaks of ochre and charcoal. It was him, the silent protector. He looked down at her, not with pity, but with a look of grim purpose. And Clara knew in that instant. She couldn't stay. Whatever life she thought she was building from the ashes was gone, burned away with her shack. Whatever was coming next was already waiting for her. And it had teeth. He led her through canyons and across streams, moving with a certainty that calmed her terror. He never spoke, but his gestures were clear. This way. Be quiet. We are close. His name, she would learn later, was Taza, and he wasn't just a warrior, he was a chief. The Comanche camp was nestled between towering sandstone cliffs and a winding river, a place hidden from the white man's trails and guarded by silence. It pulsed with a quiet energy that was completely alien to Clara. The sound of children's laughter, the rhythmic scrape of women grinding corn, the low murmur of men returning from a hunt. It was nothing like the world she had known. It was a world alive. She and Lily were brought in under Taza's direct protection. He gave her a lodge to herself, small but clean, with warm furs stacked inside. He showed her where the water was, where the food was stored, and then he left her alone. But Taza was not the only one watching her. His sister, Nidita, a sharp-eyed woman with iron in her voice and grief etched into the lines around her mouth, did not trust Clara. Her gaze was a constant weight, a silent accusation. Clara learned from the whispers of other women that Nidita had lost her own daughter to a white raiding party the year before. In Clara, she saw a pale-skinned echo of everything she'd failed to protect, a painful, living reminder of her loss. Still, Nidita never turned Clara away. She offered food, pointed to tasks that needed doing, and even taught her the words for fire, water, and mother in the Comanche tongue. But her eyes remained guarded, cold, as if waiting for the moment Clara would prove her worth, or betray their trust. Then there was Aisha, a boy of about 10 with a mischievous grin, a missing left arm, and 1,000 questions. He followed Clara like a curious shadow, fascinated by her fair skin and the tiny, pale baby. "Do white babies cry different than Comanche ones?" he'd ask, poking at the fire beside her in the evenings. "Is your hair made of corn silk?" Clara didn't know how to answer his strange, innocent questions, but she found herself smiling more with Aisha than she had in years. He was an orphan. Taza had taken him in after a settler's steel trap had mangled his arm, leaving him scarred but unbowed. He was not blood to anyone in the camp, but he was family. The most curious connection, however, was between Lily and a stray dog that had wandered into the camp the same day they arrived. It was a mangy, scarred thing, with a noticeable limp and one torn ear. But every single time Lily cried, the animal would appear, sitting patiently beside her basket, its one good ear up and alert. The other women laughed. They said the dog had chosen her spirit, that it would protect her from the ghosts that steal dreams in the dark. Clara didn't laugh. She believed them. In this strange, new world, she was starting to believe in things she couldn't see. These were not a people without pain. They were a people who carried it openly, who had learned to wrap it in ritual, song, and silence. She watched Taza often, always from a distance. He spoke little, but he moved with the certainty of someone who understood the language of the land better than the language of men. He listened more than he led, and yet his people followed him without question. Clara wondered what kind of man could take in so many broken things, an orphaned boy, a grieving sister, a wounded woman and her baby, and still build something so whole, so strong. She didn't understand their ways, not yet. But for the first time in her life, she felt no fear in not knowing. But her past was not as dead as she had hoped, and it was coming for her. A scout they had posted to watch the planes rode into camp one afternoon, his horse lathered in sweat, his face tight with urgency. He spoke to Taza in low, clipped tones. Clara was nearby, mending a hide, and she caught three words that made the blood drain from her face. Riders, white men, and a name, Raymond Holt. Clara froze, the bone needle slipping from her numb fingers. Raymond. He was alive, and he was coming. She'd never told anyone his name, not even Taza. She had let herself believe he'd vanished forever, drunk himself into some shallow, unmarked grave. But now his shadow stretched across the horizon again, long and wide and merciless. Taza didn't react with anger or surprise. He simply turned and looked at Clara, his dark eyes unreadable. "You know this man," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara hesitated, her mouth as dry as dust. "He is Lily's father," she whispered, and the entire camp seemed to shift, like a great tree bracing for a storm. The mood in the camp changed instantly. No one panicked. These were a people accustomed to threats, but every movement became sharper, more deliberate. Voices were clipped. Women began quietly gathering their children, leading them toward the hidden caves in the cliffs. Warriors appeared, checking the fletching on their arrows, sharpening the blades of their knives. Even the elders, who rarely left the warmth of their fires, began tightening their blankets and muttering to one another, their ancient eyes filled with a new, grim light. That night, the council met in Taza's lodge. The firelight flickered across the serious faces of the senior warriors and the elders. Clara wasn't invited, but Nadita was. Clara waited in her own lodge, Lily sleeping in her lap, the stray dog a warm weight against her leg. Every snap of the fire, every distant sound, made her jump. She was a sickness that had infected this peaceful place. She was the reason the drums were silent tonight. Hours later, Nadita entered her lodge without a sound. Her face, in the dim light, was not angry. It was profoundly sad. "They want to give you back," Nadita said quietly, her voice devoid of its usual sharpness. "Some of the elders, they believe it is the only way to avoid a war we cannot win." The breath was knocked from Clara's lungs. Give her back? Like a stolen horse? A sack of grain? "I don't belong to anyone," she managed to say, but the words rang hollow, even to her own ears. Her life had been a series of transactions made by men. Taken, beaten, hidden, protected. And now, perhaps, traded. Lily stirred, letting out a soft, innocent wail, a tiny question that no one in this world seemed able to answer. Clara stood up, her legs trembling, and walked out of the lodge, straight to where Taza stood alone, staring into the embers of the council fire. "I won't go back," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. He nodded slowly, his gaze still on the fire. I know. Then he looked at her, and she saw the weight of his leadership in his eyes. But if we keep you, men will die. Warriors with families, women and children may be caught in the fighting. Her throat tightened. So I'm a cost. You are a choice, he corrected her, his voice low and steady. One that affects more than just you and your child. And that was when she truly understood. This wasn't a storybook sanctuary. It had never been. It was a home, and homes, and the people in them, protect themselves. If she stayed, she couldn't be a guest anymore. She couldn't be a burden. Raymond's return wasn't the problem. She was. That night, she sat beneath the vast, star-dusted sky, Lily asleep in her lap. The mangy dog curled at her feet, a silent, loyal guard. She felt a small presence approach and looked up to see Aisha standing there, his young face unusually solemn. He crept over and handed her something small and smooth. It was a carved wooden arrow, the fletching made of hawk feathers, the shaft etched with symbols she couldn't read. What does it mean? She asked softly. Isha shrugged his one shoulder. Nidita made it. She said if you carry it, you fight back with more than just your hands. Clara gripped the small arrow, its sharp point pressing into her palm. She didn't know what the next day would bring. War, death, a forced return to a life that was worse than death. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for someone else to decide her fate. She would not be given away. She would choose. And whatever storm was coming, she would meet it head on. But she had no idea the storm had already changed. The man leading the riders wasn't the man she thought it was, and his reasons for hunting her were darker than she could ever imagine. The next morning, 2 scouts who had been watching the posse returned. They didn't ride in. They stumbled in, on foot, clothes torn, one of them bleeding from a gash on his head. They hadn't just been spotted. They had been captured and then released, with a message. Taza met them, his face a mask of stone. The entire camp gathered, a silent, anxious circle. They did not want to fight, the scout said, his voice ragged. They want to trade. A murmur went through the crowd. They have one of our own, the other scout added, looking at Taza. They took him while he was checking his traps by the river, a boy. Clara's heart stopped. Who? Taza demanded. Isha. The world tilted. Isha, the curious, one-armed boy who had been her shadow, her first friend in this place. Captured. What are their terms? Taza's voice was dangerously quiet. The scout swallowed hard, his eyes flicking nervously toward Clara. The boy. For the white woman. A wave of shock rippled through the camp. Aisha was one of them. An orphan, yes, but raised by the tribe. He was their son. Clara felt dozens of eyes turn to her, not with hatred, not yet, but with a new, terrifying calculation. The choice was no longer abstract. It wasn't about a potential war anymore. It was about a life, a boy's life, weighed against hers. Nidita let out a choked cry. Despite her coldness toward Clara, she had a soft spot for the motherless boy. She rushed forward, grabbing Taza's arm. We cannot let them have him. He is just a child. An elder with a face like a dried riverbed spoke, his voice raspy with age. The boy is one of us. The woman is not. The choice is clear. It is a hard path, but it is the path of our people. Others murmured in agreement. Clara felt the ground give way beneath her. She was being erased, her life and Lily's deemed less valuable than one of their own. It was a cold, brutal logic she couldn't argue with. She looked at Taza, pleading with her eyes. He was the chief. His word was final. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. He was weighing the lives in his hands. No, a voice said. It was Clara. The word left her lips before she even realized she was speaking. Everyone turned to her. "You will not trade a child for me," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I will not be the cause of his death." She took a step forward, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I will go. I will turn myself over to them. But you must promise me you will get Isha back." Silence. A stunned, heavy silence. Nidita stared at her, her hard face softening with disbelief. Taza's expression finally broke. A flicker of something, respect, admiration, crossed his features. "You would do this?" he asked. "You would return to the man who beat you, who left you for dead?" "He is not the man I fear," Clara said, and the words surprised even herself. The fear of Raymond was a familiar ache, a scar. But the fear of causing an innocent's death, of being the poison in this camp, that was a fresh, unbearable wound. "I will go." But before Taza could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. 2 warriors were dragging someone between them, a man gagged and bound, his clothes ragged. He was kicking and struggling, his eyes wide with terror. It was Raymond. They had found him hiding in the rocks, half-starved and delirious. He wasn't with the posse. He wasn't leading them. He was running from them. They threw him on the ground in the center of the circle. He looked up, his eyes locking with Clara's. And there was no anger in them, only pure, undiluted fear. "Clara, you have to help me," he rasped, the gag now pulled from his mouth. "He'll kill us all. He's not just some rancher, he's a monster." "Who?" Taza demanded, grabbing Raymond by the collar. "Who is leading these men?" Raymond was trembling, saliva flecking his lips. "It's not about you," he screamed at the Comanche. "It's about her. It's always been about her." He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. "It's her father." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Clara stared at Raymond, her mind refusing to process what he'd said. "No," she whispered. "No, he's dead. My father is dead. He died years ago." "He's not dead," Raymond cried, his voice hysterical. "He found me a month ago, showed up at the saloon with men with guns and dead eyes. He said he was taking you back. He said you had shamed the family name for the last time." A memory, sharp and painful, pierced through the fog of Clara's disbelief. Her father, a man whose love was a cold, sharp thing, full of judgment and scripture. The day he had given her to Raymond, his eyes had been like chips of ice. "He will teach you humility," he had said, as if handing her a death sentence. She had believed he was dead, because for years she had needed him to be. It was the only way she could breathe. Taza looked from Raymond's terrified face to Clara's pale, shocked one. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture far more dangerous than he had imagined. This wasn't a simple dispute between a husband and wife. This was something else entirely, something older and deeper. "Why?" Taza asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Why does he want her back now?" "I don't know," Raymond shrieked. "Something about her mother, an inheritance, some kind of fortune in land or gold. He said she couldn't have it. Said he'd see her in her grave before he let a disobedient daughter inherit what was rightfully his." An inheritance. The word was nonsensical. Clara's mother was a gentle, defeated woman who had owned nothing but her own sorrow. But then she remembered. Whispers. Fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Her mother, before marrying her father, had come from a wealthy family in the East, a family that had disowned her for marrying a poor, fanatical preacher from the frontier. Clara had always assumed it was just a sad story. But what if it wasn't? What if her mother, in a final act of love and defiance, had left something for her? Something her father now wanted to steal. It wasn't about shame. It was never about shame. It was about greed. The entire dynamic had shifted. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a heist. And she and Lily were the prize. "So you ran?" Taza asked Raymond, his voice dripping with contempt. "You led them here and then you abandoned them?" He was going to kill me, Raymond whimpered. He said once he had her, he had no more use for me. Suddenly, the situation with Isha became terrifyingly clear. Her father wasn't just trading for her. He was testing the Comanche. He was trying to provoke them, to see how they would react, to see if they were honorable, or if they could be broken. "This is not a posse," Taza said, his gaze sweeping across his worried people. "This is an army, led by a man who believes he is righteous. He will not stop until he has what he wants." He turned to Clara, and his eyes were dark with a terrible understanding. "He did not just come to take you back. He came to wipe us out, to erase any evidence of where you have been." The choice was no longer about one boy versus one woman. It was about survival, the survival of everyone in this valley. Clara looked at the faces around her. The fear, the anger, the confusion. She had brought this curse upon them, a curse with her father's face. She walked over to Raymond, who was still blubbering on the ground. She looked down at the man who had caused her so much pain, and she felt nothing. No hate, no pity, just a vast cold emptiness. Then she turned to Taza. Her voice, when it came, was steady, chillingly steady. "You said I was a choice," she said. "Now I am making one." She looked out toward the plains, toward the place where her father was waiting with a captured child and an army of killers. "We are not going to trade. We are not going to run." She reached down and took the bone needle she had dropped earlier. Her knuckles were white. "We are going to fight." A strange calm settled over Clara. The terror that had been her constant companion for years receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was the calm of a person with nothing left to lose. She had been hunted. Now, she would become the hunter. She began to change, and the Comanche saw it. It started with small things. She stopped flinching at loud noises. Her hands, once soft, became calloused from grinding corn and scraping hides. She learned to move silently through the brush, her feet clad in moccasins that Nedita had made for her without a word. Nedita herself had changed. The wary suspicion in her eyes was replaced by a grudging respect. One evening, she found Clara trying to fletch an arrow, her fingers clumsy and slow. Nedita watched for a moment, then took the arrow from her, her own scarred hands moving with practiced speed. "Your hands are for healing, not for killing," Nedita said, her voice still rough. "But a mother must know how to do both." It wasn't a warning, it was a truth. Clara was no longer just the white woman with the baby. She was Clara, a learner, someone who knew how to keep a fire burning through a rainstorm without making smoke, someone who could read the tracks of a deer in the dust. But there were emotions no lesson could touch. She still woke sometimes to the sound of Lily's cries, her heart pounding, expecting to see her father's cold eyes staring down at her. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in her gut. Guilt for bringing this danger, this war, to a people who had only ever shown her kindness. Still, they prepared. Taza was a brilliant strategist. He knew the land, every ravine, every cave, every blind canyon. He knew they could not win a direct fight against superior numbers and firearms, so they wouldn't fight one. "He expects us to be warriors," Taza said to the council, his voice echoing in the main lodge. "Proud, loud. He expects us to ride out and meet him on the open plain. We will not." Clara, who had been allowed to sit in the back and listen, stepped forward. All eyes turned to her. "I know how he thinks," she said, her voice clear. "He is arrogant. He believes he is smarter than anyone else. He believes you are savages. He will underestimate you." Taza studied her, a long, thoughtful moment passing between them. "You have a plan." She nodded. "He wants me, so let him think he can have me." The lodge was silent. "You would offer yourself as a sacrifice?" an elder asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "No," Clara said, her chin high. I will offer myself as bait. A wild grin spread across Taza's face. He understood immediately. A false trail, he said, his mind already working. We can lead them into the Gorge of Whispers. The canyon walls are steep. There is only one way in and one way out. Once they are inside, Clara continued, her heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, you can close the trap. And bury them in it, a voice finished. It was Nedita. Her eyes were burning with a cold fire. For Isha. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It relied on deception, on timing, on Clara's ability to face her own monster without flinching. Later that afternoon, as the warriors painted their faces and their horses for battle, Clara did her own preparing. She took the simple dress she had arrived in, the last remnant of her old life, and tore it into long strips. She soaked them in oil and wrapped them tightly around the heads of a dozen arrows. As she worked, Nedita came and knelt beside her. Silently, she dipped her fingers into a pot of red ochre and drew a single, sharp line across Clara's forehead. A warrior's mark. What does it mean? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. It means you are no longer prey, Nedita said. It means you are not to be mourned, but to be followed. By dusk, she was ready. She stood tall, a bow in her hand, a quiver on her back, firelight flickering in her eyes. The plan was set. Taza and a small group of warriors would take Raymond and ride out to meet her father, pretending to agree to the trade. Raymond, terrified for his life, would play his part. He would tell them Aisha was being held in a camp deep within the Gorge of Whispers. Once her father's posse was inside the narrow canyon, Taza's warriors, hidden on the rim, would unleash hell. But there was one more part to the plan, a part only Clara and Taza knew. There is a risk, Taza had told her. If they have scouts, they might see our warriors on the rim. So we need a diversion, Clara had said. Taza had nodded grimly. Someone has to get Aisha out before the fighting starts. Clara looked at him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Me, she had said. She would use the chaos of the fake trade to slip away, circle around the back of the canyon, and find where they were holding the boy. It was suicide, but it was the only way. Now, as she watched Taza and his warriors ride out into the twilight, she clutched the small, carved arrow Nedita had given her. She had been hunted. She had been broken. Tonight, she would be the fire that burned it all down. Clara moved like a ghost through the twilight, her moccasined feet making no sound on the rocky ground. The air was cool and carried the scent of dust and sage. In the distance, she could see the flicker of a single campfire, marking the meeting point Taza had arranged with her father. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast silence. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every gust of wind sounded like a whispered warning. Lily was safe, hidden deep in the caves with the other children and a handful of elderly women, watched over by the stray dog, who refused to leave her side. Knowing that was the only thing that kept Clara moving forward. She circled wide around the meeting point, keeping to the high ground, her eyes scanning the landscape below. She saw them. Her father's men, a rough-looking posse, maybe 20 strong, rifles held carelessly, their arrogance a palpable thing even from a distance. And in the center, on a tall black horse, was him, her father. Even from here, his posture radiated a cold, unyielding authority. She saw Taza and his 5 warriors ride in, leading a bound and pathetic-looking Raymond. The parley began. This was her chance. She slipped away, moving deeper into the network of canyons, her destination the far side of the Gorge of Whispers. According to the scouts, there was a small, defensible alcove there, the most likely place they would hold a valuable hostage like Isha. It took her nearly an hour, scrambling over rocks and through thorny brush, her hands and knees scraped raw. The sounds of the negotiation faded behind her, replaced by the lonely cry of a coyote. She found the alcove. It was just as the scouts described, a shallow cave set high up on the canyon wall. 2 guards were posted outside, their figures silhouetted against a small fire. They were laughing, sharing a bottle, their guard completely down. They thought the battle was already won. Clara flattened herself against the rock, her breathing shallow. She knocked one of her fire arrows, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never killed a man. She had never even truly fought. "You fight back with more than just your hands," Nidita's voice echoed in her mind. She took a deep breath, drew the bowstring back to her cheek, and aimed for the small fire. She let the arrow fly. It arced through the darkness and struck the pile of firewood with a soft thump. For a second, nothing happened. The guards looked at it, confused. Then the oil-soaked rags caught. The fire exploded in a whoosh of orange flame, startling the guards and momentarily blinding them. In that instant of confusion, Clara was moving. She scrambled up the rock face, another arrow already knocked. Before the first guard could even rub the spots from his eyes, the second arrow took him in the throat. He gurgled, clutching at his neck, and fell backward into the newly enlarged fire. The second guard spun around, raising his rifle, but Clara was already on him. She didn't use an arrow. She used the knife Nidita had given her. It was a close, ugly, clumsy struggle. He was stronger than her, but she was faster, fueled by a desperation he couldn't comprehend. She brought the blade up under his ribs, and he went limp, a look of profound surprise on his face. She didn't wait to see him fall. She scrambled into the cave. Isha was there, tied hand and foot, a dirty gag in his mouth. His eyes were wide with terror, but when he saw her, a flicker of hope ignited in them. She sliced through his ropes with her knife. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, pulling the gag away. He shook his head, rubbing his wrists. They were going to kill me, Clara, after they got you." "They are not getting me," she said, her voice a low growl. "Come on, we have to be quick." They crept out of the cave. Below them, in the main gorge, she could hear shouting. The trap had been sprung. Her father's men had ridden into the canyon. But something was wrong. The shouting wasn't just coming from below. It was coming from above, from the canyon rim. There were gunshots, dozens of them, far more than Taza's few warriors could account for. Clara's blood ran cold. It was a trap, but not theirs. His. Her father had never intended to trade. He had anticipated their plan. He must have sent another group of his men to circle around and take the high ground, trapping Taza's warriors between them and the posse in the gorge. They were caught, annihilated. A wave of despair washed over her. She had failed. She had led them all to their deaths. "Clara, look!" Aisha hissed, pointing. A figure was climbing down the canyon wall not far from them. He moved with a confident agility that was chillingly familiar. It wasn't one of her father's men. It was one of Taza's warriors, a young man named Kono. And he wasn't running from the fight. He was running toward them. But he wasn't looking at them with relief. He was looking at Isha, and he was smiling. "You did well, boy," Kono said, his voice carrying in the sudden lull in the fighting. "You led her right to us." Clara stared, her mind refusing to comprehend. She turned to Aisha, the boy, her friend, the orphan she had saved. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Kono, a proud, triumphant look on his young face. He held out his one good hand, and in it was a small carved wooden arrow, the one he had told her Nidita had made. "The payment," Isha said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "He promised me a new rifle, a real one. Betrayal. It was a pain sharper than any knife." Isha hadn't been captured. He had walked into her father's camp willingly. He had been the one to tell them about the Gorge of Whispers. He had been the one to suggest they lay a counter trap on the rim. He had been the one to betray them all. For a gun. Kono laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the canyon walls. The rifle is yours, boy. The old man is a man of his word. He started toward them, his own knife drawn. Now give me the woman. He wants her alive. The boy he doesn't care about. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of shock and horror. The whole thing had been a lie. Isha's friendship, his questions, his vulnerability, all of it a performance, a long, patient con to earn her trust. She shoved Isha behind her, raising her own knife. "You will not touch him!" she snarled at Kono. Kono stopped, confused. "What? The boy is a traitor. He sold out his own people." "He is a child," Clara spat, "and you are a monster." In that moment, a new sound cut through the chaos, a high, piercing war cry. From the rocks above them, a figure leaped down. It was Nidita. Her face was a mask of pure fury, her eyes burning like coals. She must have suspected something, must have followed Clara. She landed between them, a long blade flashing in the moonlight. She didn't hesitate. She lunged at Kono, her movements a blur of practiced violence. Kono, surprised by her sudden appearance, was thrown on the defensive. "Isha, run!" Nidita screamed, her voice cracking with desperation as she parried a blow from Kono's knife. "Get back to the caves!" But Isha didn't run. He stood frozen, his face a mask of conflict, watching the woman who had been like a mother to him fight a man he now served. Nidita was a fierce warrior, but Kono was younger, stronger. He drove her backward, step by step. His blade slipped past her guard, leaving a deep gash on her arm. She cried out in pain, but didn't falter. "He promised me a future," Isha shouted, his voice filled with a strange mix of defiance and pleading. "He said the Comanche way is dying, that the white man's world is the only one left. He promised you chains," Nidita grunted, shoving Kono back. "There is no honor in serving a man who burns homes and steals children." She saw an opening. She feinted high, then dropped low, sweeping Kono's legs out from under him. He fell hard, the breath knocked out of him. Nidita raised her knife for the killing blow, but from behind her, Isha moved. He tackled her, his small body hitting her with surprising force. It wasn't a malicious act. It was panicked, confused. He knocked her off balance just for a second. It was all the time Kono needed. He scrambled to his feet and drove his blade deep into Nidita's side. She gasped, a shudder running through her body. Her eyes met Clara's, and in them, Clara saw not defeat, but a final desperate command. Nidita collapsed, and in her final breath, she did one last thing. She reached out and grabbed Aisha's ankle, holding him fast. Kono turned to Clara, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Now, it's your turn." But he had made a fatal mistake. He had taken his eyes off the fight below. A single, powerful figure had emerged from the chaos of the gorge. He had scaled the canyon wall with impossible speed. His face was painted black for war, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury that seemed to make the very rocks tremble. It was Taza. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at Kono, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, undiluted vengeance. "Traitor," Taza whispered, the word a death sentence. Kono's face went white with terror. He had betrayed his chief. In Comanche culture, there was no greater crime. He turned to run, but Clara was there. The fear, the shock, the grief, it all coalesced inside her into a single point of cold, hard rage. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer prey. She was Nidita's fury. She was Taza's justice. She drove her knife forward with all her strength, just as Nidita had taught her. It found its home in Kono's heart. His eyes went wide, not with pain, but with utter surprise. He slid to the ground, dead before he hit the dust. Clara stood panting, the bloody knife in her hand. Below, the battle was turning. Taza's appearance had rallied his warriors. Her father's men, caught off guard, were now fighting for their lives. She looked at Aisha, still held by Nidita's dying grasp. The boy was sobbing now, the full weight of his betrayal crashing down on him. Taza walked over to his sister's body. He knelt, closing her eyes with a gentle hand. He looked at Isha, and his face was a mask of profound sorrow. "Why?" Taza asked the boy. I just wanted a place," Aisha whimpered. "I wanted to be strong." "Strength is not in a rifle, little brother," Taza said softly. "It is in here." He touched his heart. "You have broken yours." He stood up and looked at Clara, at the blood on her hands, at the new, hard light in her eyes. He knew in that moment that the woman he had rescued from the burned-out shack was gone forever, and in her place stood a warrior. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. The traitors were exposed, the ambush was broken, but the war was far from over. Her father was still out there, and he was still coming for her. The aftermath of the battle was a landscape of smoke and sorrow. The Gorge of Whispers lived up to its name, the wind carrying the low moans of the wounded and the silent screams of the dead. Taza's warriors had won, but at a terrible cost. They had lost several of their own, including the brave Nidita. Her body was carried back to the camp with honor, her name sung in a mournful chant that echoed through the canyons. They brought Aisha back, too. He was not bound. He was not treated as a prisoner. He was treated as something worse, a ghost. The other children wouldn't look at him. The women turned their backs when he approached. He was now an outcast, adrift in the community that had once been his whole world. The rifle he had betrayed them for lay abandoned in the dust of the gorge, a worthless piece of wood and steel. Clara felt a profound emptiness. She had taken a life. The feel of the knife sinking into Kono's chest was a sensation that would be forever burned into her memory. It hadn't felt heroic. It hadn't felt like justice. It had felt like a piece of her own soul tearing away. But when she looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully, her small face untroubled, she knew she would do it again. 1,000 times over. Her father had escaped. In the chaos, he and a few of his core men had fought their way out of the canyon and vanished into the night. But he wasn't gone. He was just regrouping. A new, grim reality settled over the camp. They had won the battle, but this was now a war of attrition. Her father was wealthy. He could hire more men, endless men. He was obsessed. He would not stop. Clara found Taza staring out over the plains, his face etched with worry. "He will be back," she said. It wasn't a question. Taza nodded. "And with more men. We cannot withstand a siege." "Then we don't wait for one," Clara said. Taza turned to her, surprised by the cold certainty in her voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done hiding," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've been running from him my whole life. Here, with you, I learned to stand. But now, I have to learn to walk toward the threat." "Clara, that is suicide. He wants you. If you go to him, he wins." "No," she said, a radical, terrifying idea taking root in her mind. "He wants the inheritance, and he needs me alive and under his care to get it. He needs to break me, to bring me home as a penitent daughter." She turned to face him, her eyes burning with an intensity he had never seen before. But what if the daughter he's coming for no longer exists? He didn't understand. "I am going to end this," she said. "Not by fighting his army, but by destroying his reason for fighting." She walked away, her purpose clear. She went to her lodge and began to prepare. She didn't take a bow. She didn't take a knife. She took the simple, worn dress she had been wearing when Taza found her. She braided her hair in the style of a Comanche woman. She took the red ochre and drew Nidita's mark on her own forehead. Then she went to the pen where the horses were kept. She chose a sturdy mare, one that was fast and reliable. Taza found her there, her preparations almost complete. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "My mother left that inheritance for me," Clara said, her voice eerily calm. "Not for him. There are papers, lawyers in a town back east. My father can't touch the money without me, But the reverse is also true. She swung herself onto the horse's bare back. I am going to ride east, she said. I am going to find those lawyers, and I am going to claim what is mine. Taza stared at her, stunned. Alone? Through hostile territory? With your father and his men hunting you? They will be hunting for a woman hiding in the canyons. They won't be looking for one riding in the opposite direction, she said. It's the last thing he would ever expect. It was an insane plan, a desperate gamble, but it was also brilliant. And what of Lily? Taza asked, his voice soft. Clara's composure finally cracked. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. I am leaving her with you, she whispered, her voice breaking. It is the only way to keep her safe. If I take her with me, I will be caught. If I stay here, we all die. She was leaving her child. The thought was a physical agony, a knife twisting in her gut. But it was a choice born of a mother's fierce, protective love. Protect her, Taza, she pleaded. Protect her as you protected me. Always, he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. She took one last look at the camp, at the soaring cliffs that had been her sanctuary. She thought of Nidita's fiery spirit, of Aisha's broken heart, of Lily's innocent smile. Then she turned her horse east, toward the rising sun, toward a world of strangers and laws and papers. She was no longer running from her father. She was racing him. And the prize was not just a fortune. It was her future, and her daughter's. The world outside the canyons was a harsh, bleached-out landscape. The sun was a hammer. The wind was a constant thief, stealing moisture from her skin and hope from her heart. Every rider she saw in the distance sent a jolt of terror through her. Every campfire at night could be his. Clara rode hard, pushing her horse, pushing herself. She ate berries and roots, the things Nidita had taught her to find. She drank sparingly from her water skin. She thought only of the goal. Get east, find the lawyer, end it. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of riding, hiding, and riding again. She missed Lily with an ache so profound, it was a physical pain. She would wake in the night, reaching for her daughter, her arms finding only empty air. But the thought of Lily's face, safe in the Comanche camp, was the fuel that kept her going. After 2 weeks of relentless travel, she reached the edge of the frontier. The landscape began to change. Trees appeared, then fences, then small, dusty towns with names like Redemption and Providence. These places were more dangerous to her than the open plains. Here, a lone woman with a warrior's mark on her forehead and the haunted look of a fugitive in her eyes was an object of suspicion and scorn. She learned to pull her hair forward, to keep her head down, to be invisible. She traded the horse Taza had given her for a ticket on an eastbound stagecoach, a rattling, bone-jarring prison on wheels. She sat crammed between a portly salesman and a severe-looking woman who clutched a Bible to her chest and eyed Clara with open disapproval. The name of the town she was looking for was St. Louis. It was a name her mother had whispered once, in a rare moment of reminiscence. The name of the law firm was Blackwood and Finch. She had no idea if they still existed. She had no idea if they would even speak to her. She arrived in St. Louis caked in dust, her money almost gone, her spirit worn thin. The city was a bewildering chaos of noise and people, a world away from the silent dignity of the plains. She found the offices of Blackwood and Finch on a street lined with stately brick buildings. She stood outside for a long time, her courage failing her. She was a savage in a borrowed dress. What would these men in their fine suits see when they looked at her? Taking a deep breath, she walked inside. The office was quiet and smelled of old paper and lemon polish. A young clerk looked up from his desk, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackwood or Mr. Finch," Clara said, her voice raspy from disuse. My name is Clara Holt. My mother was Eleanor Vance. The clerk's eyebrows shot up. He excused himself and disappeared into an inner office. A few moments later, an elderly man with kind eyes and a fringe of white hair emerged. "Mrs. Holt?" he said, his voice gentle. "I am Alistair Finch. I was a dear friend of your mother's. Please, come in." Clara followed him into a spacious office lined with books. He gestured for her to sit, and for the first time in weeks, she sank into a chair that was soft. "I must confess," Mr. Finch said, "we have been trying to locate you for some time. After your mother's passing, the terms of her trust were quite specific." He pulled a thick file from a drawer. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman. She knew her husband's character. She feared for you. She set up this trust to ensure you would have a means of escape, should you ever need it." He opened the file. "The Vance family fortune is considerable. Your grandfather's shipping business, land holdings, investments. Your mother's portion, which she left entirely to you, is substantial." He named a figure that made Clara's head spin. It was more money than she could possibly comprehend. "However," Mr. Finch continued, his expression turning grave, "there is a complication, a most vexing one. Your father." "He knows about the trust," Clara said. "Indeed, he has petitioned the courts. He claims you have abandoned your husband, that you are living in sin with savages, that you are mentally unfit. He is trying to have you declared incompetent, so that he might be named your guardian and trustee of the estate." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Can he do that?" "He has powerful friends. He is a man of the cloth, which carries weight," Mr. Finch said grimly. "He has painted a very convincing picture of a wayward daughter who needs to be saved from herself. We have been fighting him, but without you here to speak for yourself." Her desperate ride had not been the end. It was just the beginning of a new kind of battle. Not a battle of knives and arrows, but of lies and laws. "There is a hearing," Mr. Finch said. "In 3 days. A judge will decide." Clara's heart sank. She had come all this way, only to find the trap had closed around her again, this time with walls of paper and words. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Finch looked at her, at the mark on her forehead, at the strength that had been forged in the fire of her suffering. "My dear," he said, a small smile playing on his lips, "you do not have to do anything. You just have to be yourself. You just have to tell your story." But he didn't know the whole story. He didn't know about the blood on her hands. He didn't know the secrets she carried, and her father was a master of lies. He could twist her story into something ugly and monstrous. He could make them believe she was exactly the savage he claimed she was. She had escaped the wilderness, only to find herself in a far more dangerous jungle. The courtroom was an imposing chamber of dark wood and high ceilings. It felt colder and more menacing than any winter on the plains. Clara sat beside Mr. Finch, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt small and out of place, a wild thing caught in a cage. Across the room, her father sat with his own lawyer. He looked different here, in a tailored black suit, his face a mask of pious sorrow. He looked respectable. He looked like a grieving father, worried for his lost child. He met her gaze once, and his eyes were full of cold triumph. He believed he had already won. The judge, a stern man with a formidable gray beard, entered, and the hearing began. Her father's lawyer spoke first. He painted a masterful picture of Clara as a weak-willed, hysterical woman, easily led astray. He spoke of her abandonment of her husband, Raymond Holt, a simple, hard-working man. He spoke of her being captured by a savage Comanche tribe, and how she had, in her delirium, come to embrace their heathen ways. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "we are not here to punish this poor woman. We are here to save her. Her father, the Reverend Holt, a pillar of his community, seeks only to provide her with the care and guidance she so desperately needs, to manage her affairs until she is herself again. Then her father took the stand. He wept. He quoted scripture. He spoke of his boundless love for his only daughter, his voice breaking as he described his fear for her immortal soul. "I failed her," he said, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. "I allowed her to marry a man beneath her station. When he disappeared, she fell into despair. She was not in her right mind. These savages took advantage of her grief. I only want to bring my little girl home." It was a brilliant performance. Clara could feel the mood in the room shifting. The judge was looking at her with pity. The spectators were murmuring in sympathy for the heartbroken father. She was losing. Then Mr. Finch called a surprise witness. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a man was led in. He was thin, pale, and his hands trembled. It was Raymond. Her father's face went rigid. Raymond had not disappeared. Mr. Finch's investigators had found him, living in a flop house in a river town, a broken man haunted by his own cowardice. Raymond took the stand, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mr. Holt," Finch began gently, "can you please tell the court about your marriage to Clara?" Raymond swallowed hard. It was not a good marriage." "In what way?" I drank," Raymond mumbled. "I was not kind to her." "Did you beat her, Mr. Holt?" Finch asked, his voice sharp. Raymond flinched. "Yes." "And did the Reverend Holt, Clara's father, know about this abuse?" "Yes," Raymond whispered. "He knew. He told me it was my duty as a husband to correct her. He said her spirit was too proud, that I needed to break it." A gasp went through the courtroom. Her father was on his feet, shouting, "Lies! This man is a drunkard, a degenerate. His testimony is worthless." "Silence!" the judge roared, banging his gavel. "Sit down, Reverend." Her father sat, his face purple with rage, his pious mask shattered. Mr. Finch wasn't finished. "Mr. Holt, why did you leave your wife and child alone in that shack on the plains?" Raymond finally looked up, his eyes full of a miserable, pathetic shame. "Because he told me to," he said, pointing a shaking finger at Clara's father. "The Reverend. He came to me. He told me his plan to get Clara's inheritance. He said I was in the way. He paid me to disappear. He said if I ever showed my face again, he'd have me killed." The dam of lies had broken. The truth was pouring out, ugly and undeniable. Then it was Clara's turn. She walked to the stand, her legs steady. She no longer felt like a caged animal. She felt the spirit of Nidita beside her, the steady presence of Taza in her heart. She looked directly at the judge. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply told her story. She spoke of the beatings, of the birth of her daughter, of the silent Comanche chief who left food for a starving woman and child. She spoke of her shack being burned, of the bounty hunters. She spoke of the Comanche camp, not as a place of captivity, but as a place of healing, of community. She told them about Nidita's courage. She told them about Isha's betrayal. She told them about the battle in the gorge. She left nothing out, not even the blood on her own hands. "My father says I am unfit," she finished, her voice clear and strong. "He says I am a savage. If it is savage to fight for your child, to protect the people who saved you, to choose freedom over a gilded cage, then yes, I am a savage, and I will wear that name with honor." She stood up and looked at her father. For the first time in her life, she saw him not as a towering monster, but as what he was, a small, greedy, pathetic man. "You did not come to save me," she said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "You came to rob me. You tried to break me. You failed." There was a long, profound silence. The judge stared at her, his stern expression unreadable. Then he cleared his throat. He looked at Clara's father, his eyes filled with a cold disgust. "Reverend Holt," the judge said, his voice like chipping stone. "I have heard enough. This court finds your petition to be not only without merit, but fraudulent, malicious, and frankly, monstrous." He banged his gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "Petition denied. The trust belongs to your daughter, and I would advise you, sir, to leave this city immediately. You are a disgrace to your cloth and to the name of father." It was over. She had won. Clara felt a wave of relief so powerful, it almost brought her to her knees. She had faced her monster in his own territory, and she had slain him with the one weapon he could not defeat: the truth. As she left the courtroom, her father stood in the hallway, his face a mask of incandescent hatred. "You have not won," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You think these paper walls will protect you? I will find you, and I will find that half-breed brat of yours, and I will burn everything you love to the ground." A chill went down Clara's spine. The legal battle was over, but the war was not. He was right. He wouldn't stop. He was a cornered animal, and now he was more dangerous than ever. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't go back to the Comanche camp. He would be looking for her there. She would only lead his rage straight to Lily's doorstep. She had to end it, for good. She turned to Mr. Finch. "I need money," she said. "A lot of it, in cash, and I need you to hire someone for me." "Hire someone?" Finch asked, confused. "A bodyguard?" "No," Clara said, a cold, hard resolve settling in her heart. Not a bodyguard. She thought of the men her father had hired, men with dead eyes and no souls, men who killed for money. "I need you to hire a hunter." Clara didn't wait for the law. The law was too slow, too clean, for the kind of animal she was dealing with. She took a large sum of cash from the trust, left the rest in Mr. Finch's capable hands, and disappeared back into the murky underbelly of the West. She didn't hire just one hunter. She hired 3. They were a rough-looking crew she found in a smoky tavern on the St. Louis waterfront, men whose reputations preceded them. One was a former lawman with a grizzled face and a fast draw. Another was an ex-Confederate tracker who could follow a whisper through a hurricane. The third was a quiet, deadly man with a knife and a penchant for silence. She told them the story, omitting the parts about the Comanche and Lily. She told them a man, a wealthy and powerful man, was hunting her. A man who had tried to steal her inheritance and had sworn to kill her. She gave them her father's name, Reverend Holt. "We find him," the former lawman said, spitting tobacco juice into a spittoon. "Then what?" "I want him stopped," Clara said, her voice cold. "Permanently." The men exchanged a look. This was more than just a protection job. This was an execution. "That'll cost you extra," the tracker drawled. "I can pay," Clara said. She gave them a description, his likely travel routes back to the frontier, the names of the powerful friends he might seek help from. And then she did the last thing they expected. "While you are hunting him," she said, "he will be hunting me, and I will make it easy for him to find me." She was going to be the bait. Again. But this time she controlled the trap. She bought a horse and rode west, but not toward the Comanche camp. She rode toward the territory where Raymond had told her he first met her father's men, a lawless region of mining camps and whiskey dens, a place where a man like her father could recruit a new army of thugs. She let her trail be obvious. She used her real name. She didn't hide. She was a lure, drawing the shark toward the hook. It took a week. She was staying in a run-down hotel in a dusty scrap of a town called Purgatory. She was sitting in the saloon, nursing a glass of watered-down whiskey, when she felt his presence. The air grew colder. The cheerful noise of the saloon seemed to dim. He was standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his preacher's suit. He was dressed for the frontier, a long coat covering the gun at his hip, and behind him stood 4 men, the same kind of hard-faced killers he'd hired before. He had found her. He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "Daughter," he said, his voice soft, but it carried across the room. "I told you I would find you." The saloon patrons scattered, sensing the impending violence. It was just Clara, her father, and his men. "I knew you would," Clara said, not moving from her chair. "I was waiting for you." His smile faltered. This wasn't the terrified reaction he expected. "Your games are over," he snarled. "There are no lawyers here, no judges, only God's law." "Your God is a monster," Clara said, standing up slowly. "Just like you." He lunged for her, but she was ready. She kicked the table over into his path, sending bottles and glasses crashing to the floor. His men drew their guns, but before they could fire, the saloon doors burst open. Her hunters had arrived. The ex-lawman's pistol was a blur, firing twice, dropping two of her father's men before they even knew what was happening. The tracker took cover behind the bar, his rifle barking. The silent man with the knife seemed to materialize from the shadows, his blade flashing. The gunfight was brutal, loud, and short. When the smoke cleared, all of her father's men were dead. Her father stood alone, his gun still in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He fired at the ex-lawman, but the shot went wide. He was trapped, beaten. He looked at Clara, and in his eyes, she saw not just hatred, but a final, complete, and utter lack of humanity. He raised his gun, not at the hunters, but at her. If he was going down, he was taking her with him. He never got the chance. A shot rang out, but it didn't come from inside the saloon. It came from the street. Her father staggered, a red hole appearing in the center of his chest. He looked down at it, confused. He dropped his gun, fell to his knees, and then pitched forward onto the dirty floorboards. Dead. Clara rushed to the doorway. Standing in the middle of the dusty street, a smoking rifle in his hands, was Taza, and beside him, holding his hand, was Aisha. Clara stared, her heart a wild, confused drum in her chest. "Taza, here." And Isha. Taza walked toward her, his face grim. "We followed you," he said simply. "We could not let you face him alone." "But how?" she stammered. "How did you find me?" "The boy," Taza said, nodding toward Isha. "He is a good tracker. He betrayed us with his mouth, but his feet remembered the path of loyalty." Isha would not meet her eyes. He stood with his head bowed, the picture of shame. "I had to," the boy whispered. "I had to make it right. Nidita, she would have wanted me to protect you." Clara didn't know what to say. The anger she felt toward him was still there, a hard knot in her stomach. But seeing him here, having followed her across a continent to help her, it softened the edges of her rage. Her hired hunters emerged from the saloon, looking at Taza and Aisha with wary curiosity. "That him?" the ex-lawman asked, nudging her father's body with his boot. Clara nodded, a profound wave of exhaustion washing over her. It was finally, truly over. "Job's done, then," the man said. "Pleasure doing business with you, ma'am." He and his men tipped their hats and melted back into the shadows of the town, their pockets full, their work complete. Clara turned back to Taza. "Lily?" she asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. "She is safe," he said, his eyes softening. "She has a new protector." He gestured down the street. The mangy, one-eared stray dog trotted into view, its tail giving a slight wag when it saw Clara. It had followed them, too, a silent, four-legged guardian angel. That night, they made camp outside the town. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who had been through a war together. "What will you do now?" Taza asked, staring into the fire. "I don't know," Clara confessed. "The money. I could go anywhere, do anything." She could go east, live in a fine house, give Lily a life of luxury and safety. But the thought felt hollow. That was not her world, not anymore. She looked at Taza, at the quiet strength in his face. She looked at Isha, a boy struggling to find his way back from a terrible mistake. She thought of Nadita's sacrifice and of the community that had taken her in when she had nothing. "My home is with you," she said, the realization settling over her with the warmth of the fire. "If you will still have me." Taza smiled, a rare, beautiful thing. "You are one of us, Clara. You have a warrior's heart." They returned to the canyons. Clara's homecoming was not triumphant. It was quiet, solemn. When she walked into the camp, Lily in her arms, the people gathered. They did not cheer. They nodded, a gesture of deep, communal respect. She had faced the white man's world and won on her own terms. She had brought peace to the valley. She used her inheritance, with Mr. Finch's help, to buy the entire valley and the lands surrounding it. Thousands of acres deeded to Taza's people, a sovereign place where they could live without fear of encroachment. She had used the white man's weapon, money, and laws to protect the Comanche way of life. She never became Taza's wife. Their bond was something different, deeper than that. They were partners, two leaders, a chief who understood the land and a woman who understood the world beyond it. Together, they built a future. Isha was slowly, painstakingly forgiven. He worked twice as hard as any other boy, never complaining, always seeking to prove his worth, to honor Nadita's memory. He would, in time, become one of Taza's most trusted warriors, and Clara found her peace. Not in a quiet life, but in a meaningful one. She raised Lily to be strong and proud, a girl with her mother's fierce heart, Taza's quiet wisdom, and Nadita's unbreakable spirit. A girl who knew both the words of a book and the language of the wind. She had walked through fire and blood, through betrayal and loss. She had been broken into 1,000 pieces, but here, in this hidden valley, surrounded by her chosen family, she had put herself back together. Not into the woman she was before, but into someone stronger, someone whole. Clara's story shows us that sometimes the family you are born into is a cage, and the family you find is the key. It reminds us that true strength isn't about the absence of fear, but about facing it head-on, and that sometimes you have to burn down the world you were given to build the one you deserve. If you enjoyed this story of survival, justice, and rebirth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the edge of the world.